I thought it was cool. We had, Dr. Myers here, and if you notice, he quoted some of the quotes I use in class, and he had some pretty good stuff. So listen closely. I thought that was really good historical information. We read Fox's Book of Martyrs to our kids at supper time, and they called it the murder book. The murder book. But you know what? And I wish he'd mentioned this. He didn't say this. There were two books that were owned by almost every Christian household that owned books. They had two books in the United States of America. You know what two books they were? Bible and Fox's Book of Martyrs. Yeah, they were the two most owned books of any books.
Actually, it was a bestseller.
Interesting, isn't it? Very interesting. So, and I hadn't remembered that about Martin Luther being in. Of course, martyr has been supplanted intentionally by non-Christians, because a martyr dies for their faith or for their belief or what they're convinced in. In the modern era, martyrs kill other people for their belief, which is not at all what a martyr is. So anyway, that's kind of a real perversion, isn't it? Well, I want to go back and really engage this question, because we're hitting a section, if you haven't noticed, that's critically important within the logical argument. So I'm going to go back, and I did this last week, and I got everybody all excited and confused at the same time. But the whole point at the beginning of Hebrews was the rest, was entering the rest. And the picture that was given, I thought, was beautiful, because it was that to enter God's rest was pictured like a house, or like more than a house, more like a family or a home. And therefore that was the whole deal. And the author was appealing to that audience. That audience of ours, of the Greeks, the Romans, everybody. Well, everyone wants a home, right? Doesn't everybody want a home? Everybody wants a home. Everybody wants a place. I don't care how much of a loner you are, probably the people that have the greatest issues are those that are real loners that don't have a home and don't have something. And the appeal that the Hebrews author is making is not a pure emotional appeal, because we saw that as he described the rest of God, that was the whole picture at the beginning of Hebrews. And do you remember what the promise of that rest, what did the promise of the rest rest on? Do you remember what the promise of the rest came out of at the beginning of Hebrews? If you don't remember, it was the promise that came through the priesthood, that was through a Messiah. And the word Messiah wasn't used per se, because they were going through the whole smear of Israel, right? And so he kind of gave us, kind of a slight history of Israel. So what we've entered now is a different kind of proof within the same context of that proof. The author brought us that we're talking about the rest of God, and he brought that rest through historically, Israel, right? And that was the whole approach at the beginning. That was to give us that cohesive argument. Now we have gotten to the point, and I drew the picture up here because I think this is really important to note. Okay, so we have the cosmos, right? And we have within it philosophia, and within that the real world. And here's that flame with the metaepithumia reaching to theos. But we saw last week that the metaepithumia reaches to theos, and that comes from what? The priest, right? The priest is the one that is delivering or lighting that metaepithumia, the sacrifice, which is I don't think it's, yeah, which is Christos, right? This is Christ, right here. The Christ is the sacrifice, right? So if the rest comes through, this is Israel, and the priest, and the priesthood, right? And Christ is the sacrifice, and with the sacrifice, metaepithumia, which is the scent of the sacrifice, is reaching eternally to God, and from God reaching eternally to man, then what piece are we missing? What is the piece that ultimately leads us to the rest of God? To God's rest, being in the family of God.
Being convinced.
Well, being convinced is a critical part of the whole equation. But I'm talking about from a philosophical, if I'm developing a philosophical thing, I have Christ as a sacrifice, right? And that sacrificial smoke, or the metaepithumia, the scent of the sacrifice, is reaching to God. And at the same time, through that sacrifice, God is reaching to man. But the rest comes through the concept of the promise to Israel through the priest, through the priesthood, right? What do I miss? What am I missing? What do I need?
Priest.
A priest. I need a priest. I need a priest to make this argument. This isn't a recursive argument. It's not a circular argument. But to make this argument come around to the correct, to make sure that the promise of the beginning of Hebrews comes true, comes to fruition, I have to have a priest. Keep that in mind as we get into it. Now here's the words of the day. K-A-T-A-P-E-T-A-S-M-A-T-O-S. Kata. Petasimates. And I give you some notes. Kata always means, you may know it's hard, it's kind of a tricky one. Kata means down, down. Now, down, it's a preposition. I don't think do we have a preposition in English that means down? We really don't. You know, we would make probably a word, we'd probably put two words together or use a prepositional phrase. We don't really have a word that means down in this context of Greek. But petasimatos means, let's see, I put it down here, I had to. Petasimatos means, middle voice, to fly. To fly. Down, fly down. And fly down, okay, well, Shazam, what do we got there? Does that mean we're flying? No. This is very interesting. This is a word that I told you last week that we hit, and we're going to hit today, that means literally, do I remember what it means? I think it's right in there. Yeah, it's in there in the thing. I can't hide it too much from you. It's the veil of the temple. It's the veil. Aha. But, okay. All right, what kind of word is this? Well, it's a big long one, but it's what? Is it Hebrew?
Greek.
It's Greek. It's Greek. Well, what we've seen, haven't we seen that the Greeks, or at least the Koine Greek, appropriates Roman words when it needs it, right? And it appropriates Hebrew words when it needs it and wants it, right?
Synagogue.
Well, synagogue is a Greek word. Aha, synagogue. Synagogue is a Greek word, meaning a gathering of, a led gathering is a synagogue. So, what does this mean? What does it mean if, okay, this word is known to be the word meaning the veil in the temple. Okay, I'll draw you a picture. I always have to. Here is the temple grounds that has a wall around it. Inside the temple grounds, there's an altar inside here. This is the altar. Okay, within that is the Holy of Holies. There is the holy place, and then separating the holy place from the Holy of Holies, which is here. This is the Holy of Holies, and this is the holy place. And separating the two is the veil. This right here, the downflow. All right. So, I'm a Hebrew writer, or am I think these guys were Alexandrians, but that's okay. They obviously are Teen Hodos, and they're Jewish, right? We can tell that. We know they're Jewish and Teen Hodos. They're still writing to a multiple audience. But this word in the New Testament applies to the veil in the temple. If I'm going to appropriate a word that means the veil in the temple, what would I normally do?
Quote it
Yeah, quote what? What word? Where would I get my word?
from the Hebrew.
From the Hebrew. The Hebrew, right? If I'm going to use a word, if I'm going to appropriate a word that means the veil in the temple, if I'm Hebrew or Greek or Roman or whoever, I'm writing to Greeks, I'm going to use the Hebrew word unless what? Unless it is uniquely understood what the word means. Which means that this word, downfly, must be what kind of word? Unknown?
Familiar.
No, very well known.
Well known because of what? Is it well known because of the temple? How many people, how many Greeks do you think, if you're walking around in Athens, in this Thebes, Athens, Macedonia, Sparta, I don't care where you are, you're walking around in Greece or Rome or whatever, you're talking to a Greek, and you say, okay, I'm the roving reporter, I'm Waters, and I want you to ask me a question. You're an average Greek dude. Do you know about the veil in the temple? What would they say?
Well,
I never heard of that. What are you talking about? What downfly would they know about? What does this indicate? This indicates that in a Greek, I see you're thinking it. Are you thinking it?
I was going to say something stupid.
You know, something stupid?
Yeah, Icarus crashing because he got too close to the sun.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
downfly.
that's true. That's true. Well, just think about this, okay? For them to use this word to indicate the veil in the temple, it has to be appropriated because it means a what in Greek? It means a veil in a temple, right?
So do Greek temples have veils?
That is a wonderful question, because we don't fully know if they did or not. This is a very difficult question, because if you look at a Greek temple, you know, here's my Greek temple. It's like this, and it has like this, and then there's a door. Here's a door, and the altar is always outside. The altar is always outside. Okay, and it's always raised up. And between the two, there's always the door to the God, and the God is here. Here's the God. The God's sitting there, right? That's where the God stands or sits. This is a question. Why do we have a problem with this? Why is there a problem? Because if it's a veil and it's made out of cloth, then what happens in antiquity as it
Disintegrates.
it disintegrates? You know, and unless we have some recording, right? And that's the problem. Remember what I told you about in antiquity, or things in antiquity? The stuff we don't know is the stuff that is well known by the people. They don't write down what they already know. They write down unique stuff. And then of the unique things, many times unique stuff doesn't get written down because everybody knows it, right? So the problem we have in antiquity is I'll bet you, we get to heaven and you ask the question, where's the veil? And I bet we'll find out that there is a veil right here.
Well, you said that they would hide the God, they would bring the offerings and then they'd hide it so that people, you know, when they take it away and the priest would eat it. I mean,
Right.
they hid the God from the people so they couldn't see the God devouring the.
Right. Yeah, they had a door here. There's always a door. But maybe the veil was here. Because, you know, if you go into a Greek temple, we don't know for a fact if every Greek temple had a wooden door, it had some kind of partition. But they had to have something that separated the God from the people. Because there is something in antiquity. And I'm just saying to you, okay, this is a Greek thing we don't fully know. If you find out about it, in all of my reading, I have not been able to discover this. Because this word is not, it's not uniquely used in the New Testament, but it is a word that is difficult to kind of trace. Because look what it means, what it says, right? The down fly down, you know. It is obviously, as it says in the New Testament, it means specifically this veil in the temple. this separation. So I will put you that there's got to be in a Greek temple an analog. Because otherwise I get what? A Hebrew word, right? I'd pull the Hebrew word and pull it out. So this is really interesting, kind of cool, you know?
Because you would assume there'd be a Hebrew word for that, right?
There is. There's big time Hebrew word. I didn't look it up, sorry.
I've got the Hebrew word in this Jewish Bible.
What's the Hebrew word?
Parokhet, P-A-R-O-K-H-E-T.
There you go. And that sounds pretty, Greekish, right? I mean,
Why does it have to be a physical structure? If it's fly down or down fly, however you want to say it, why can't that be in the context of the scripture that God is communicating because of the priest with the people?
well, you know what? I'm not going to take that away. I think that's beautiful. But remember, let's start first in the Greek. You got to be concrete. The Greeks are absolutely concrete. But that is what I'm trying to get at here, right? In the sense of an aha for you. If the Greeks call it a fly down, what does that mean within the context of the Greek, right? And this is what we're getting at.
Well, in the Exodus, when
Right.
manna came from the sky, how
Uh-huh.
would that be described?
Could be a similar thing. It's just that this Greek word, has come to mean, and yeah, I'm totally in support of what you just said. In a Greek temple, does this indicate the point of that is the transition between man and God, right? The veiled transition between man and God. This is what? The veiled transition between man and God. Because in Mark, what happened to it?
You got torn in half.
It got torn in two,
Top to bottom.
from top to bottom.
It was 30 by 60 feet.
And that's not a Greek imagery, is it? Because Greeks don't like symbolic imagery. They're into the concrete. But how much more concrete can you get than here is my God, and here is the veil, and the veil splits? What would you think a Greek would think of that?
But is the importance the fact that the veil split, or is the importance that, again, you're talking about Greek being concrete, so something concrete had to have happened, but again, the splitting of the veil at crucifixion is that reunification has occurred.
Well, remember, what did I tell you? What did I say when we studied Mark? Does anybody remember back in Mark? And I said, we were reading Mark. I said, what is it obvious in the Greek split the veil? Split the curtain.
With God leaving the temple because of the crucifixion.
And in what form did God leave the temple? Do you remember? It says it. It
When?
says it in Mark.
Breath.
The breath of God. Yeah, the Ruach HaKodesh. The breath of God, the Holy Spirit left the sanctuary of God, the Holy of Holies. And that, it's a win. It's,
So up until that time, the only place that he was there. Now he's left and come among the people.
ta-da! I would say that is, we know that God was always among the people, but I think that the imagery that God was trying to show us, and okay, we're talking theology here, I'm sorry, we're touching on a theological pool here, but I think that is right on, that although Greek is absolutely concrete, the message that God was trying to send was, dudes, I'm not in the Holy of Holies anymore, I'm here, right? As Meyer said, which is right on, all are chosen. Not everybody is convinced. So, I think,
I've also heard the veil being torn is an imagery, if you want to stay in the symbolic, of the covenant symbology that goes on. When you have a covenant, there's a meal, you tear a cloak in two, and each person has half of that cloak in Old Testament covenant practice. And so when the veil was torn, again, that is the rending of a cloak or a garment, and showing God's covenant it's part of covenant imagery.
part of the sacrificial process, yeah.
I just think that the priest would have been firsthand knowledge of that. It would have been add 1 plus 1 together, they would have, it had to mean, it would have been obvious, physically obvious what happened.
And that's why in the Acts, as a matter of fact, okay, look, to us it's a mystery. To us it's a mystery. Where did the Jews think the Ruach HaKodesh was? In
The Holy of Holies.
the Holy of Holies. Where did they think God resided?
The Holy of
The
Holies.
Holy of Holies. The Ruach HaKodesh came from the Holy of Holies. They knew that, right? The minute this wind comes and rips the veil in two, there is no priest out there that couldn't say, well, holy smoke, maybe God's going on a trip. Maybe he's taking a cruise. Maybe he paid, and he's off to Aruba. I don't know,
He never
right?
left the building.
Blow me to Aruba. He's gone, right? This is like, to them, it's like the most obvious thing in the world. To us, we're like, I don't know. I'm not sure. It's like, dude, you can't be not sure about this. This is,
In the whole ceremony or the whole scheme of things, only man had to go to God. The high priest had to go into the Holy of Holies,
Yep.
which he could go once a year, right?
yep. And we're going to get to that, matter of fact.
Okay, then I'll be quiet.
No, go ahead.
Well, with the veil being rent, torn apart, God now is with us all the time and with all of us, not as an intercessory or only through the high priest.
Well, even more, what does this indicate?
We're all priests.
Well, you can hold that thought, that's a good thought. But it indicates that what happened?
Something big changed.
Well, something went out
Right.
so something could go in, or something went in so something could go out. What goes in? What's the only thing that goes into the Holy of Holies? There's only two things.
The high priest,
The high priest, and with him,
sacrifice.
the blood of sacrifice. Two things, right? Go in with it. Period. Dot. And so this means that when the veil is rent,
It's not necessary anymore. It's been done.
well, that's an okay conclusion. I'll go with that. I'm just saying from a purely concrete sense, in a fully concrete sense, no symbology, no ideology. Something went in and something went out. Or something went out and something went in. And guess what we have here? Look at the picture. In the picture, the metaepithumia of the sacrifice is going up to God and coming back down. There's also a down fly. What's the big down fly here? We already said it, right, before. The cosmos. The separation between man and God, whatever that is. If there's no more separation, there's no more cut it down. But anyway, that's okay. The next word here, D-I-K-A-I-O-S-U-N-N-E-S. Diakasunos. Diakasune. Diaka. All right. This word is kind of a hard word. This word is one we translate righteousness. But it doesn't exactly mean righteousness. It means specifically equitable. Equitable. And you notice here it says in character, act, by implication, innocent, holy. Well, that's kind of made up, isn't it? Equity of character or act. Specifically Christian justification. Yeah, the average Greek. I'm water. Water's world. Hi. What do you think of diakasune? Diakasune means what? Well, that's equity in a person. That's a pretty high-level person. Does it mean Christian justification? Well, first of all, I've never heard the word Christian before in my whole life, ever. Do you mean that Teen Hodos group of people or something? Yeah, or, they're kind of wacky, right? Yeah, that word was appropriate and everybody knows what it means. No, it doesn't apply to Christian justification. It's dikasune. It's a Greek word that the Greeks were all aiming for. And so when the Christian message came into them, it was like, what do you want to be? What do you want to grow up to be? Dikasune.
I like it when you always do the balance being, there's like balance between things.
Yeah, I'll remind you. Okay, remember the picture of Mercury And the Mercury is always shown on a globe, right? If you go look at the original statue, Mercury is not on a globe. Mercury is on the top of a ball. Number one, they didn't believe the world necessarily was round, although they did have an idea that it was curved. But the reason that Mercury is always shown, Mercury, let's see, here's a Mercury, right? Mercury's always shown, he's got winged feeties, and he's always shown balancing on the top of a ball, because Mercury was the god of, communication, commerce, and thieves. Thieves. He was viewed as the perfect balance because he communicated to people from the gods. He communicated the word of the gods to the people, right? And at the same time, he was a thief.
So he was the god of distortion.
Yeah, he's a god of modern news, right? He's a fake news guy. The big deal they're trying to show is this dichotomy, this paradox. In other words, in a Greek worldview, if you are perfectly perfect, like as in doing everything the gods think you should be doing, and at the same time you're a rogue, that's dikasune, right? Because it balances out. Now, that's not kind of the way we look at it, or really even they fully look at it. What would they say? Dikasune isn't extremes, right? They would say dikasune is, yeah, it's the point, you know, I mean, they say what the yin-yang, okay, I'm not going to go there, it's kind of silliness, but the point of it is that it's a balance. In other words, and this is very specific, okay, a person who gives, and the Jews talk about this too, a person that gives all their money to charity and then starves, right? That's stupid. And God would say, are you an idiot? Right? And the Jews said that too. The Jews actually in the Talmud talk about, you know, you're not allowed to give more than X because if it does, it will detract from your family. I think it's really interesting to go into that detail. But we know that going to extremes, even of charity, you know, is silly, right? And going to extremes of badness, of course, is horrible. Now, the Greeks didn't look at thievery or roguery quite the way we do. It's a little different kind of culture of society. I don't want to go into great detail. But anyway, with this in mind, let's look. We're at 19. And remember, in running up to 19...
Let me stop you just a second.
Yes, sir.
Why did Christ make such a big deal of the widow's mite? If what, and I'm not disagreeing with you, but I see this as a contradictory statement to what apparently the Jews taught. I mean, the widow's mite, my understanding is that was her, that was it. She had nothing else. And I know his point was that she gave more than all these rich people that didn't mean anything. I mean, it wasn't significant to their life. But why wouldn't she be violating the principle you just talked about?
Because I think it's a ubiquity. That money is not ubiquitous in that period. And so we think, our view of the world, right? I got money, well, actually I don't have any money in my pocket. I have credit cards, I think I have some bills. But I'm just saying, you know, our view of the world is everybody has money in their pockets, in their credit card, right? In their world, people did not have money. Money was not ubiquitous until the beginning, really, of the 20th, 19th century. It's hard to tell exactly when in time, but there is a time at which money became pretty ubiquitous within culture. It's the time when children started getting money. When you start reading the books, like from Dickens, and you know, like for example, the Dickens, the 19th century, and you start seeing kids getting money. When kids get money, that means what?
Money to spare.
There's money around, right? Yeah. Before that, there was not money to spare. There was not money. Money, every piece of metal was money. Which means that the widow, where did widows get anything?
Inheritance.
Inheritance, hand-me-downs, charity, right? There was charity for them. So probably she would get in kind, right? She would have food from her neighbors or whatever from her neighbors. What did she usually not have? Money in her pocket. And so the fact that she had 2 lepton, which are made of, depending on the source you read, they're either iron or they're made of, like bronze or something like that. The fact that she had 2 lepton and she was able to put it into the temple meant that she was giving every penny she had, every piece of money she had, but because money was not ubiquitous, it was like, where did she get this money, right? Maybe it was the last of her inheritance. Maybe it was the last of the money that she had saved scraped by. Maybe it was the last pieces she had. What was unique about it, that I think Jesus' point was, is the sound. She put it into the trumpets. The trumpets were the round things, kind of like I told you, when you give the charity thing and you run the penny around it, right? And it makes a noise. They had trumpets, and they were made out of bronze or copper, probably bronze. We know it from Josephus, and we know it from Edersheim. Edersheim writes about this. But they threw it in, and the money went into the coffers so the priest couldn't steal it. And so when it went into the coffers, if it was copper and bronze or silver or gold, it would make ringing sounds. But if I threw in a couple of iron lepton, donk, donk, right? And so it was obvious. And what would there be? Okay, first of all, I've got a row of people. Usually, do you think the poor usually would come in and throw their money into the trumpets in the temple? Yeah, they were outside begging for it. Exactly. They didn't have any money. So if they had anything, usually, like for example, our disciples here, talking about, for example, Judas Iscariot carrying the money bag. You know what? Now the men probably had some money because remember they got paid by denarius. However, how do you think they got their stuff? Okay, I'm a fisherman. I go out and fish.
Trade and barter.
Bingo! I bring you a tuna. No, whatever they have, a bass, right? And I say, okay, can I get some bread for this? And the guy says, yeah, I'll give you 3 loaves. Right? No money changed hands. By the way, why did you not want money to change hands necessarily? Taxes. That is right on. Right? If you were poor, you didn't want to have money because you would pay taxes. It's kind of like today. My tax attorney guy says, it's a good thing you're paying taxes. It means you're making money. But, the best way not to have to pay taxes is not have any money.
What do you think the internet's so positive for buying stuff? It's obvious.
Yeah, obvious. Yeah, I know. I like what you're thinking there, dude. Anyway, look. I just have to say this. We read this stuff, right, within the cultural context of what we know. And even then, we should feel their pain. And they would probably feel our pain, although I had a guy make this comment, and he probably made it in the wrong audience, but I thought it was a very good comment. He says, all my woes are first world problems. Right? He's not starving. He's not hungry. He's not, begging on the street. He's not, he's living in a house. All of his woes have to do with, well, where am I going to go eat? Where am I going to entertain myself? Right? First world woes. Anyway, I thought that was a really interesting thing. So anyway, let's look at 19. We in the ones leading up to this, it is obvious that the meta-epithumia is this line, this eternal line, going from man to God, and from God to man. That's what's so critical, both. And it says in 19, here, I'll read this. In 19, King James, which hope we have as an anchor of the soul, both sure and steadfast, and which entereth into that within the veil. Here's the Greek. We have, and hope is added. We have is there, hope is added, an anchor, literally an akura, an anchor, for the suke, not so the suke. Suke. Pneuma sarx. For the suke. Take it how you like. This is probably thoughts. Pneuma. Suke. For the suke. Not necessarily for the soul, for the suke, for the mind. firm, literally asphales, not fail, and bibos, like a foundation. It enters, it erishomai, into the esoteros, the interior, the inner sanctuary, the interior. That's good. Behind is added the downflying, the veil, the downfly. That is saying, very obviously, if the anchor is the sacrifice, right? The anchor is the sacrifice. Because this is the thing, this is the Christus, the sacrifice that is making the meta-epithumia that's going to God. So where is that sacrifice anchored? Behind the veil. Which means it is anchored where? Where God is. Yes, that's exactly right. It is anchored where God is. Now this is so anti-Hebrew. Why you would name this Hebrew, I don't know. Because in Hebrew, where does the meta-epithumia come from?
The altar.
The altar that is outside of, that's inside the temple complex, right? But not in the Holy of Holies. Yes, sir.
At the time of Jesus, was the Ark of the Covenant still in the temple? I can't remember my history.
No. It from the time of Josephus, I believe. Wasn't it the time of Josephus? It had disappeared. It had been taken by the Amorites. One of those groups took it and didn't give it back. I can't remember which group it was. There was one group that took it and got plagued. And then so they said, you can have it back. But then another group, I think it was, I can't remember who it was, took it and didn't give it back. It became part of their treasures or whatever. But yeah. But remember, okay, now the audience, every audience here, right? We placed this, when did we place this? Around, we said it's at least after 70 AD, right? We said it's probably around 70 AD after the destruction of the temple, because that's when the diaspora would be. So that means that what? What does everyone in Teen Hodos know about? Well, the resurrection and all, well, okay, let's draw our line. Okay, here's the line. Here's the death of Christ, about 33 AD. I always have to say, remember, Christ was born about -6 BC, or 6 BC, just because we always have to remind ourselves that our calendars were off, but we based it on 33 AD. So Christ is about 40-something years old when he was crucified and resurrected. And then over here we have 70 AD.
So how many people were still alive? I mean, that time, that's 37 years later. There aren't that many people that witnessed the crucifixion, nor, I mean, it's now secondhand, is it not?
You mean here?
Yeah.
You mean here?
Yeah.
Paul did, and every man who was in Israel at the time, who was over 8 years old, did, because they were in Jerusalem. They had to be.
No.
Are you saying
You're-
because
are
of
you
life
talking about life
expectancy,
expectancy?
most of the people were dead?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying at 70 AD, how many of the people that were alive at
First-hand
33
witnesses.
AD were still alive?
I would say, as a group, probably the main driver of life expectancy in all times and all cultures is
Wealth.
Infant and child mortality.
infant and
Exactly.
child mortality. So when they had a huge mortality problem.
If you pass that point, then you have a little longer life expectancy.
Right, so I would suspect that it was lesser than today, but still pretty high. So you had people living up into the 80s and maybe 90s, even, well, we know 80s easy, because we have lots of records of that. We have lots of records of people in this period living to pretty ripe old ages. So if we even said 70, I'd say we have a lot of people that were that, this is only 30 years.
37.
Yeah, so, it's still 37 years. People lived well beyond. Like I said, Yeah, even in the worst periods of the medieval era, most of the deaths were children. Yeah, it's sad. Sad but true. You know, if you go down to Africa, you'll find really older people. A lot of them died. A lot of children, infant mortality. So yeah, there were probably a lot, but that's not my point. The point is this: see, the authors we know had seen it. The authors we know were probably in the last stages. Well, not I would say last stage of their life. They were in an older stage, but they were writing what they knew for the record of the people and trying to produce information that would give you a logos to tell us. This is like an in-state document, in my opinion. You know what I'm saying? This is like a document where you say, I want to document where we should be. This is really a doctrinal document, although we don't have a lot of doctrinal documents in the New Testament, right? In fact, we excluded them. So, we're saying this is probably written around 70 AD, at least at some point within that. So where is Paul? Where's Paul? The first Thessalonians? Yeah. He died
Paul, well, I'm saying Paul died around 66, 67.
55.
That's just looking at,
Well, it
where
depends.
they dated 2nd Timothy, which would have been his last letter.
Yeah, but that's wrong. 55. There are people, you have the old Pauls and the new Pauls, okay? The new Pauls, this gets complicated, okay? There are people, there's a whole bunch of myths about Paul that come out of the pseudographia, okay? There's a bunch of neat pseudographia, like for example, that Paul went to Spain, right?
That would have been the fourth, yeah, if there was a fourth missionary journey, right, that would have been, and they mentioned that was a possibility, but they can't confirm that happened.
If you take all the Pauline stuff and you put it together, you get that Paul was probably, by our best historical records, crucified in Jerusalem around 55 AD. Now, I don't want to discourage the idea that there's a possibility that it was later than that, but the problem, if you do that, there are problems. You have some issues if you begin to push them beyond that point. And plus, the early thing is more accepted by a lot of historians, and the early point does what for the church documents?
It means we're closer to the time of Christ.
Right, and it corroborates. And if we have a great corroboration in 55. Now, I will go with 67, and I'll say, okay, 67, because that means that Paul even had more influence and more time, right? But it leaves out some issues. There are issues like the fourth journey, right? That's not mentioned at all in Acts. So, yeah, if you take the timeline of Acts, you kind of get around 55, and 55 is later. But the first Pauline document is well placed, or well historically documented. 1 Thessalonians written in 52 AD. 52. 52. So, what that means is that the Pauline documents, the first one that we can place around 52 AD. The Didache is probably way early. And the Didache already lists the Lord's Prayer and talks about practice. It's a doctrinal document. But if this is true, okay, within this context, where are the Gospels written? Except John. Where can you place the Gospels? Historically, the Gospels can be placed between around 60 to about 90. John being about 90s. So, if I'm writing in 70, what does that mean? Teen Hodos most likely has Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And if they got Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they know all about the veil. Right? And a lot of this was by word of mouth anyway, to begin with, right? We had 500 witnesses. And so the people that came basically said, here it is. So, it says, we have The hope is added. An anchor. The anchor is behind the inner sanctum of the kata, and it uses this word, kata pedismotos. So the downfly, the veil. Can you state it any more directly than that? I just want you to see this. This is what it says. Which hope we have as an anchor of the soul, both sure and steadfast, and which entereth into that within the veil. However, if you know exactly, if you see what the Greek is telling you, it's telling you the sacrifice is being brought in by, and here to go to 20. Look at what 20 says. Remember I said, if something goes out, something must go in? Where? It's hopoi. It's whichever spot. Jesus, who went before us, literally a prodromos, a runner ahead, a scout for an army, has ereshomai. That's the same word used in 19, ereshomai, on our behalf. What did he enter? The Holy of Holies behind the veil. Here it is in that was in the NIV. Here it is in the Greek. Hopoi, whichever spot the protodomos, a runner ahead, is, hooper, for the sake of us, entered, came into, even is added. Jesus, genomai, caused to be an archelaus, a high priest, to the age, the aeon, after kata, the taxus of Melchizedek. In other words, who entered the veil? As and sacrifice. He was the sacrifice. Right? Remember I told you, the high priest, on one time a year, when they sacrifice a lamb, right? The scapegoat lamb, the scapegoat. They sacrifice that animal, and he carries the blood into the Holy Holies, one time a year. And that is not for the intentional sins of the people that they forgot. It's for the unintentional sins of the people. He brings it in and he puts the blood on the points of the inner altar, the incense altar, and he puts it on the, he waves it, does some stuff. You have to go look in I didn't go and dig it in. I've got some parts in here where we will look at it. But the point is that Jesus Christ was both the sacrifice, producing the meta-epithumia to God, and at the same time, he is the high priest. And you notice it's in the order of Melchizedek. Now this was mentioned before, right? This was mentioned before. It's like a foreshadowing to the author. This writing is beautiful. He's giving us a foreshadowing. He's giving us some information that builds to this Logos to telos. And now the Logos to telos is taking us to, this is the driven point. Okay? So you have to have a sacrifice and you have to have a high priest. And guess what we got? And guess where this guy goes? In past the veil that everybody knows was broken open, right? And they knew it was broken open by the Ruach HaKodesh. Guess what this shows if Jesus goes into the Holy of Holies? You said it. What does it mean? Yeah. He's God. It's God returning to his temple so that we can be in his rest. This imagery, okay, yeah, this is not Greek because the Greeks didn't like, Greeks were into concrete, but this is pretty concrete, don't you think? I mean, they're laying out a...
Why did God have to return? They believed he was in the Holy of Holies all the time.
Because
Did they not believe that?
Because remember, you had to have a sacrifice and a high priest.
But the other 364 days of the year, where did they believe God was?
Well, they believed that God, okay, they believed God was there in the Holy Holies.
Okay.
All right? That was there, that not much different than the belief of the Greeks, that Zeus was, but they believed that Zeus had powers that extended beyond that figure right, that statue. And likewise, they weren't unsophisticated people. They didn't believe that God, that's why the picture is not a God. What was the Ark of the Covenant? It was a casket, but what else was it? It was
The seat.
it's a seat, the mercy seat. It's a throne. It's a throne. The throne of God was the Ark of the Covenant is a throne. It had two angels or two whatevers, angels with the things, and it was a seat. And
Poles on it and carry around.
and you had poles, and inside of the seat were the law, and also the jar and the staff of Aaron's staff. The reason is, okay, did any human sit on that seat? Not supposed to, right? The point of the whole thing was this was the throne of God. And when they moved the throne of God. And if you remember, when they moved it, they had a light or a pillar, the pillar of fire that would show them by night, and the pillar of smoke that would, the pillar of smoke, metapithumia. Oh my goodness gracious. That would show them. The problem is, in Mark we saw, the Teen Hodas knew this, we forgot this. What happened when Jesus died? God died. And so the image that we have forgotten is that God literally gave up himself, his throne on high, the heavens, everything, for the salvation of mankind. And so when God returns to his temple, remember the imagery before in Hebrews? If you go back and review what we talked about, the imagery is that when God comes into his temple, he's bringing us in, right? And we will be in the rest of his temple, in his house, in God's house. The Okodome of God is going to be the place. But for that to happen, what happens to happen first? Do you want to go, look, do you want to go to the house of God if God ain't home? I talked about this. It even talks about it a little bit in Hebrews, right? The point of it is that when you come, I'm going back kind of, I should have. It's said in Hebrews that when you go to the house of God, how did God greet you? Remember that? He put a robe on you. He fed you. If God ain't home, can you get your robe? Can you get your food? You know what I'm saying? Do you get this? This is now to us, okay, we want to play all this image stuff, which is cool. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just that in the Greek, it's a very concrete kind of idea. And that's what the Hebrew scholar, the writers of Hebrew, are trying to express to us. Thank you, Father, for your word. I pray you look after us this week. In your name we pray.